Well, hello, COS supporters. Welcome back to another edition of COS Live. My name is Andrew Lusch. I'll be your host for this episode, and I am joined by Rita Peters, who is the Senior Vice President for Legislative Affairs, but she's also my co-host on COS Live and our live coverage of Senate committee hearings and other times when our resolution is being considered. Rita, it's great to be back with you again, 2 times in 1 week. I'm so excited to be here with you. We've moved from South Dakota over to Wyoming, and now we have a Senate Judiciary Committee that we're waiting for our resolution to be heard. You're going to hear it being referred to as SJ1. Rita, we have 19 states that have already passed our resolution calling for an Article 5 convention, and it would be under 3 topics: limiting the federal government size, scope, and jurisdiction, putting term limits on elected officials, and also restricting Congress's ability to spend our hard-earned taxpayer money. We need to get to 34 states, so that means just 15 more states to go. Rita, what I've noticed is that the Wild West is on fire for COS right now. We were just in South Dakota this last Tuesday. We sailed through the Senate. We passed there, so it's going over to the House now. We're in Wyoming right now, in Cheyenne, waiting for our resolution to be heard in the Senate Judiciary Committee. And then Montana is coming up tomorrow, another committee hearing for our resolution. So please plan to tune in to that. But Rita, there's just so much going on right now in the Wild West and just across the nation for Convention of States. Help our viewers get caught up to speed with everything that's going on right now.
Well, it is that time of year, Andrew. I feel like my hair is on fire this week. And the
A good
West,
fire, though. A good
yes,
fire.
a very good fire. The West has certainly been wild, as you said, as we kick off the 2025 legislative sessions. We got word late yesterday that this hearing in the Wyoming Senate Judiciary Committee was happening today. We knew that we were going to have our South Dakota Senate floor vote on Tuesday, so we were prepared for that for a few days, and we already knew that we were having a committee hearing in Montana in the House tomorrow. So make sure you tune in for that tomorrow morning. But this one was a late breaking surprise for us yesterday, and a great surprise it was. Now, the Convention of States Wyoming team has been building support across the state and in the legislature for some time now, led by our excellent state director, Julie Baker. Just does a wonderful job for us out there. Over 13,000 Wyoming residents have signed the Convention of States petition asking their state legislators to vote yes for COS. Now, Wyoming has a biannual session, meaning they only meet every other year. So that makes the years that they are in session just extremely important for us to make progress. In 2023, the last time they had session, the Wyoming Senate voted in favor of our resolution, but then it went over to the House side and was defeated. So we are working hard and praying for a different outcome this year. We do have COS co-founder Michael Ferris standing by, ready to provide expert testimony remotely for today's hearing. And if we have a successful vote today, we do expect this committee to vote today after the public hearing on SJ1. And if that vote's successful, our Article 5 resolution then goes to the Wyoming Senate floor for debate and a vote. And stay tuned for more info on timing of that. A successful vote today would be a critical step forward in the legislative process and just add to the momentum that's clearly building all over the country and across the West. You know, we're having all of these committee hearings right now in these Western states, but at the same time, we've got states introducing our resolution just one after one. Just recently got introduced in Minnesota, New Hampshire, and I have to share with you, for the first time ever in history, our Article 5 application was introduced just yesterday in the state of Connecticut. And with that filing, our application has officially been introduced at one point or another in all 50 states. How about that, Andrew?
Oh, I think that's just incredible. And every state now has heard about Article 5 at one point or another. That is so cool. And our resolution is just working its way through legislatures all across the nation. I got to give some love for my Nevada team. Nevada introduced the resolution as well. And it's the first time that they've done that in several years. So the team is very, very excited out here in the West. And Nevada is just an amazing team. And same with Connecticut and all of the state teams that are out there. They're working so diligently with the legislators to get our resolution introduced into their state legislature. And it's just every year, it's just, hats off to the grassroots for doing this, because they're the lifeblood of this organization. They're the lifeblood of what we do at Convention of States. And we couldn't get our resolution introduced to every single state in the union without them and without their support and their love for what we're doing at Convention of States. So it's just really, really amazing. Rita, I want to go back to what you said about Michael Ferris. This is so exciting that he's going to be offering some expert testimony when it comes time for our bill to come up. I think this is the first time that he has testified this year, but you'll remember last year he offered expert testimony all across the nation. I believe he went out to Wyoming in person at one point. And I'm just so excited because every time he speaks, it is just amazing to hear his brilliance and how he articulates Convention of States and Article 5 and the process. So I'm really, really excited for that as well. Rita, our viewers, though, they should stay tuned because we are likely to have an interview after the committee hears our resolution. We have Regional Director Deanna Beckett on standby, and she is the regional director who oversees Wyoming, and she's the one who's just running around like a person, like a crazy person in Wyoming and South Dakota and North Dakota and Montana and all the other states that she oversees. So that's really, really exciting. Rita, we're still waiting for our bill to come up. So for those who are new to Convention of States and you haven't heard about all of the states that we've passed, like I said at the beginning, we've passed in 19 states so far: Georgia, Alaska, Alabama, Florida, Indiana, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Tennessee, North Dakota, Arizona, Missouri, Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, Utah, Nebraska, Wisconsin, West Virginia, and South Carolina. 19 states. We have 15 more states to go until we get to that magic number 34, when we can start, we can get this convention off the ground. And if you didn't hear your state in that list, this is a great time for you to get connected with your state team, plug in with your state team, and try and get the resolution introduced into your state legislature and then lobby for it so that it can get passed. We need amendments to the Constitution that would put the federal government back in its constitutional box. So if you're tuning in right now and you're not part of your state team, I want to just encourage you, get in the game, get active, and let's get the COS resolution introduced in your state and passed in your state. So as we await the start of this hearing where our bill would come up, could you just give us some national updates, Rita? What's going on?
Absolutely. Well, on Tuesday, the South Dakota Senate successfully passed our resolution, and it was a major victory, a vote of 23-9. Very clear. And that came on the heels of a South Dakota Senate committee hearing, which was last Friday, and Senator Rick Santorum testified there, just gave great and powerful testimony that clearly was effective. So now in South Dakota, we're waiting to go through the House. We just got assigned to our House committee today and waiting to hear on the scheduling of our House committee hearing in South Dakota. If we're successful in committee, then it goes to a House floor vote. And of course, if we're successful there, South Dakota might become state number 20 to have passed our Article 5 application. So the Mount Rushmore state is in the driver's seat right now for that number 20 distinction. Elsewhere, our resolution is being considered in a bunch of other states. I had mentioned some of them before, but Nevada, New Jersey, New Hampshire, Kansas, Minnesota, and as I mentioned, Connecticut. That was just historic news for us. It was the first time Connecticut has filed our resolution, meaning that now all 50 states have at one time or another introduced the COS action resolution. So congratulations to Team Connecticut for a job well done. I know they're very persistent in making that happen. And as Andrew said, we're just moments away. You can see here on producer G's footage that the committee hearing in the Wyoming Senate Judiciary Committee hearing has already started. And we went live right when they started the bill that's just before ours. So as soon as they finish it sounds like they're deliberating now, which is what usually happens just before they vote. Then as soon as they vote on this bill, we will be up. And Andrew, you mentioned that the distinguished Michael Ferris is standing by to give remote testimony. If you love hearing him testify like Andrew and I do, come back tomorrow for the Montana committee hearing, because yes, Mike Ferris is scheduled to be up again to give testimony. I'm so thankful that our experts have the opportunity to testify remotely, because can you imagine trying to get them out to Wyoming on less than 24-hour notice and then in Montana the next day? It's a lot. It's a lot to keep up with even remotely, right, Andrew?
That's right. That's right. It's a lot, even just for our grassroots who live in the state, trying to get to the Capitol for hearings. So trying to get Michael Ferris or Rick Santorum or Mark Meckler or whoever to get on a flight and get out there in time. It's not easy. So, but hat tip to all of our senior advisors and our expert testifiers, because they do such an amazing job under such limited amount of time. They get there and they show up and they're ready, and they just always deliver such expert testimony. So, Rita, that tomorrow it's going to be 10 a.m. Eastern time for
Yes.
Montana, and it looks like I sounded like maybe they're moving on to our bill. So we're going to go ahead and tune in.
Packed for this bill, and it usually is.
Thank you, Mr.
You
Chairman.
flew under the radar.
I think, Mr. Chairman, I think it was where it was on the list.
Oh,
It might have overlooked a little bit, even by me, until not long ago. Thanks to Senator Hicks for reminding me. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, there are folks online though, Mr. Chairman. I think Peter has at least a couple. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to present to you Senate Joint Resolution 1, Convention of States. Many of you have been through this process and understand the issue. Certainly Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution is the starting point in this process. And Senator Crum is certainly new to the legislature, but we've actually visited a little bit, and he's kind of got some background on it. So I hope we can move quickly through this and get to some of the testimony. This is the exact resolution that the former members of this body have seen before and considered before. And as you know, Article 5 has two ways to amend the U.S. Constitution, either a proposal from Congress or the several legislatures can make application, go through a convention for amending the Constitution, not rewriting, amending the Constitution, and then subsequently send it back to the states for ratification. Congress only has two roles in this, as you well know. One, calling the convention when they see the adequate number of applications, which is 2/3, which in our current 50-state republic, that's 34. And then setting the Congress then, after the convention, sets the ratification, whether it's by how the states are to ratify it. So those are the only two roles that the Congress has in this process. The rest of the process is to the several states, the 2/3 plus states, and then the 3/4 states to do the final ratification of the amendment. I'd be glad to walk through the bill, walk through the resolution if you'd like, Mr. Chairman, or if you just want to go straight to questions, however you'd like to do it. Like I said, four of my colleagues up there have seen this before. One I visited with, so I don't want to take your time when there's other people to testify and we're the last bill of your day. So your preference, Mr. Chairman.
you don't have to walk through line by line, but if you don't mind giving us a quick walkthrough, that would be helpful.
I will, and I'm going to skip the whereases, because whereases are, they're statements of, we think this, but let's get to the meat of the bill. So the meat of the bill is section 1, page 2, line 16. And this is the legislature of Wyoming making application on 3 issues. I'll go to line 21. imposing fiscal restraints. There is nothing in the U.S. Constitution that imposes fiscal restraints on the federal government. That is not the same with the Wyoming Constitution. As you know, Wyoming Constitution does have fiscal restraints within it, limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. We, in this state, have had our fair share of what we believe are undue burdens through regulations, et cetera, from the federal government, impinging upon what many of us think are our sovereign state rights, whether it's about resource developments, et cetera, et cetera. And then the third thing that this particular resolution calls for is term limits on federal officers and members of Congress. And federal officers could be both the courts, and it could be employees of the government, if you will, public servants. So that would be something to be determined in a convention, however that convention, if that convention were called for that purpose. So that's section 1, is just the 3 purposes of this particular petition. And then the remainder of it is just process. It's about who does what, when, where. And as I said, Congress, the states make the application. When you get to 2/3, go to number 2, they call for the convention. The Congress calls for the convention. That's on the bottom of page 3. Go to page 4. This is and that requires the 2/3 again. And then the states actually establish the convention, the rules of the convention, the processes to be dealt with. And I think probably one of the most important things on page 4, in my mind, page 4, line 14 through 17, is the consideration that this is a republic and each state will be equally represented in this convention. Thus, we will have a vote just like any other state of equivalence. That's the basis of where we are, and that's how a convention would be. And by this resolution, we are affirming that we will not participate. It's not in that republic form. Rest of page 4, excuse me, is talks about the limitations. You'll hear there are folks that are concerned about runaways. The call from Congress, based on the application, is the limit of the topics. And while I know that folks can say, look, whenever a legislature or somebody convenes, they can do anything they want, they check on that as the states. The states say, come on home, delegates. You're not doing what you're supposed to. This convention is off the rails. Come on home. That's contained a little later, but that's one thing. The other thing that's the check is the ratification process, which requires 3/4, excuse me. So there are several checks in this, and Wyoming has already adopted the statutory structure for both appointing delegates and recalling them should they, and actually has, I believe it's still felony provisions, and I apologize, I did not bring that statute with me, felony provisions for those who do not uphold their duty as a commissioner or a delegate to a convention. On to page 5, Mr. Chairman. On the top of page 5, I think is also something that needs to be pointed out in this particular, that the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution for Wyoming's application, are ineligible to be dealt with. We are not going to touch First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment, go down the line. And it would be out of order and not in the delegates' ability to consider anything that had to do with those first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. As you go further, this is page 5 through lines 5 through 11. This is where the Congress can determine the ratification process. And then there's 2 options in Article 5, and that's the legislatures or a convention in the state. So that is one thing. We obviously, this resolution recommends the legislature, but Congress has that authority to either one. Romanet 7 is that recall and further instructions, and then the ability to discipline or remove those delegates from their duties, should they not. And then section 3 is just, this is an ongoing application, stays on the books until we get to 2/3. Currently, with this identical resolution, there are 19 states. I think it's being considered in 10 more states this year, Wyoming being one of those 10. And so we're getting very, I mean, with successes this year, we're getting closer. We're getting very close, and I'm very confident. Wyoming does have a balanced budget, one that some of you were involved in several years ago. So there can be a summing, if you will, if another one just had the term limits, and we have, I think, one of those on our Senate floor right now. It may be coming to your committee just for term limits. And there are, others that have term limits in them specifically. Congress would have to make that determination whether they can be aggregated. Term limits is term limits is term limits. And I think that, and like I said, that's a job for the Congress. Again, it's 2/3 of the states. And then the final, should we pass this through the Wyoming legislature, and then it would be transmitted to these folks. So with that, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'd be glad to stand for any questions. There are folks of the organization. Well, this is called Convention of States. Convention of States is an organization that is advocating for this. This is an application to call for a convention. And it is not, it happens to be something they have kind of formatted and put together and are working, advocating for. But this is based on Article 5 of our U.S. Constitution, the same one that we, as new legislators, just took an oath to. Us that were in the middle of our term, we didn't take a reaffirming oath, but that's, and I'll say this about this. When I first came into the legislature, I didn't know, I didn't understand this. And I went to 4 different conferences in this country and sat down with legislators from all over the country, all different walks of life and different political leanings, etc., and other experts, constitutional scholars, etc., which I am not, and I know there's probably folks who are, but I am not. It's the plain reading. And when I looked at the plain reading after those 4 meetings, I was very comfortable with the process. Now, there are folks that advocate for other issues, right? Dark money, other things, Citizens United. There's other things. The size of the Supreme Court, we need to put that in the Constitution. There are other issues out there. I am most, and I'm not going to say I'm agnostic about those. I care about each, may have maybe different feelings about each one of those. This one has just these three, but I'm most confident in what the founders said in the Constitution and gave us this right, this ability. And this ability is incumbent on legislatures to take advantage of it on behalf of our citizens. And that's why this is before you today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Senator Barlow? Senator Hicks.
Senator Barlow, you may have already stated it, but how many states have already passed resolutions or applications? So where are we at? I think you stated that, but I missed that. If you could repeat that.
Yeah. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Hicks. 19 have adopted the identical one, and then, like I said, there's some others that you could, if Congress wanted to aggregate them, like for term limits, they could maybe have that conversation. But 19 of this particular format and these particular issues have been there. Last I heard a couple weeks ago, there was 10 states that would be introduced this year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 10 additional states, excuse me.
Senator Hicks, you good? Senator Crum?
Just a couple quick questions, Mr. Chairman. One is, when it says, you can call them home, who calls them home?
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Crum. Our statutory structure, and again, I apologize, I'm confident our statutory structure says that the legislature names the delegates and sends them out, and they have the ability to recall them. So it'd be the Wyoming legislature either through special session for this purpose. And actually this is I'm sure this is one of the reasons we can call it special session is for this very purpose. And I apologize again to the committee that I don't have that right in front of me, but I'm confident in the legislation that it was then Representative Larson, and I think Senator Hicks ran legislation about 5 or 6 years ago that codified that process, cleaned it up, and I think modernized it to what we would expect now and understand now. And it's the legislature. This is not an executive branch function. This is not a judicial function. This is the legislature of Wyoming as a representing as a part of this process. And that's why you will note if we pass this, I'm confident it doesn't even need a governor's signature. This is our action. This is the legislature's action, not an action that requires the signature of a governor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Crum.
And then just a quick follow-up on that too. So as I understand, it takes 2/3 of the states to ratify something, then it comes back to the states. It needs 3/4 to approve it. If there was something that was not in the best interest of Wyoming, could we withhold our delegation so it didn't get to the 2/3 even at the site?
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to clarify, the application requires 2/3 of the state. So the whatever it is, balanced budget, 2/3 of the state have to ask for that. And then as the convention convenes, they come forth with an amendment to the Constitution, again, an amendment to the Constitution regarding that issue that is agreed upon by those 2/3 of the states that, not 2/3 that participate, 2/3 of the states. If it's 37 states show up and 3 of them vote against it, it's still going to go to Congress, and Congress would say, yep, go out, and the states get. Now it takes 3/4 of the states to ratify. We're at 38 states. So the key to this is 13 states can stop any resolution or any amendment to the Constitution. So that, I think, is the protection that we have, is even in these times when we color code ourselves and we do other things, it takes, a super minority to stop something that is untoward, that would be damaging. And notwithstanding the fact that First through 10th Amendment are not even on the board. They're can't even be considered. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad to stand for further questions.
Senator Crum, anything else? All right. Thank you,
Thank
Senator
Mr.
Barlow.
Chairman.
We'll go to the room. Anyone wishing to give public testimony on this bill? Mr. Downing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jonathan Downing on behalf of Convention of States, and we have a couple of my colleagues online that will be prepared to testify. If you need any questions after that, I'll be available.
Okay, great. Anyone else in the room? Ms. Herman, and then Mr. Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. Here in a minority position, I would probably acknowledge coming forward. But anyway, Marguerite Herman for the League of Women Voters. I'm a lobbyist for the Wyoming League, but what I will express today is a position taken by our National League, and it was formalized in 2016. And so, and it's been updated and affirmed since then. And so even though what I'm going to describe is our National League position, I will be happy to defend it and follow up questions if you want to. So the League has opposed this method of amending the Constitution, has never been for it, prefers the method where Congress puts out a proposed amendment to the states and gets ratified that way. And I'll go further explain that. To start out with, there are no rules and guidelines in the US Constitution on how a convention would work, which creates an opportunity for runaway convention that could rewrite any constitutional right of protection currently available to American citizens. As we all recall, the last time this happened was in 1787, and the outcome was great, but I guess it's the fear that with that kind of a situation, are we sure of that? Are we 100% sure of it? An Article 5 convention is a dangerous threat to the US Constitution, our democracy, and our civil rights and liberties. There is no language in the US Constitution to limit the convention to one issue, regardless of the best intentions of Wyoming, and we could put whatever we want out there and say this is it, or these 3 issues. But that's an expression of desire. It's not controlling really what the convention can do. And once to, I'm sorry, convention to one issue, and there's reason to fear the convention once called will be able to consider any amendments to the Constitution that the delegates want to consider. There are also no guidelines or rules to govern the convention. Due to the lack of provisions in the Constitution and lack of historical precedent, it is 1, unknown how delegates to a convention would be picked. 2, what rules would be in place. 3, what would happen in the case of legal disputes. 4, what issues would be raised, so on, how the American people would be represented, and how to limit the influence of special interests in a convention. And I'll just go straight to, so what the league did is it came up with, if there is a constitutional convention, the league believes the following should be considered in identifying inappropriate, if there is going to be one. These would be, we suggest, appropriate and well-crafted constitutional amendment requirements or conditions. Let's see. The convention must be transparent and not conducted in secret. Representation at the convention must be based on population rather than one state, one vote, and delegates should be elected rather than appointed. And this is the idea that we've always been on the record for, is proportional representation, one person, one vote. This has always been the base of the league, has always used that as a premise. Voting at the convention must be by delegate, not by state. The convention must be limited to a specific topic. Only one resolution, only state resolutions on a single only state resolutions on a single topic count when determining if a convention should be called. And what that means is that, we talked about 34 states. They would all have to agree on a topic, not just, yes, there should be a convention, and then they have their own personal list. And the validity of the state calls for Article 5 Constitutional Convention should be determined by the most recent action of the state. And those things would ameliorate the concern we have about the convention, those conditions. And it does differ greatly from the SJ1, which is before you. So we would suggest that this be defeated because it does not, in fact, meet those criteria. And if you, I'm happy to answer any questions you want to follow up with.
Senator Crum?
Mr. Chairman, just a question, if I understood this right, the proportionality of the situation. If I did my math right, 1 out of 50, we've got a 2% vote right now.
Mr. Chairman.
But if we divide into the population, we'll have, I don't even know how to do this in percentage, 16 10,000ths of a vote. So Wyoming basically has no say in the matter if it goes to convention of states, if we go to proportionality.
Well, Mr.
Ms.
Chairman,
Herman?
the idea is that this is being done by the people, not by the states. In other words, that as an individual in Wyoming, I guess just as much say as someone from Texas or someone from Nebraska, and the authority comes from the individual person. It doesn't come from the state. So I would be represented at the same level as others. And I don't know the percentages. I would trust that you've calculated correctly, but that it is an action that represents the desires of each individual citizen of the United States.
Thank you.
Senator Kolb?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, so today we're talking about Senate Joint Resolution 1. So I would appreciate something that directly applies to this document that we could talk about that you disagree with, line for line or section per section or whatever that may be. That'd be really helpful, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kolb. Ms. Herman?
So I would just simply respond that list of conditions that we would like to see in any proposal, the extent to which they are not present, would represent opposition to the proposal. The proportional representation is kind of thing it's a very basic tenet of my group. So the absence of that, as described, each state gets a representative. each state is equally, so the representation is by state equal, kind of like the US Senate. And that would be, that would diverge from the basic qualities of the proposal. Which I know is not popular in Wyoming for a whole bunch of reasons nevertheless.
Senator Cole, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you disagree with the Electoral College? I'm confused about what you're talking about. Could you clarify where you're at with that? Thank you.
Ms. Sermon.
Happy to. The League of Women Voters in its endorsement of proportional representation does advocate for a national popular vote.
All right, effectively diverged from the topic. We're not going to get into national popular vote, so thank you, Ms. Sherman. Mr. Moline.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in support of this resolution. I think these are issues that we need to work on, and I think this is an appropriate mechanism to do it. I appreciate that it is based on representation by the state, and I believe this resolution has the safeguards in it that should the person from Wyoming or the people from Wyoming go, for lack of a better term, go rogue, that we would have a mechanism to make everything work the way it's supposed to, that if they go rogue, we don't sign off on what they do. And with that, Mr. Chairman, trying to be brief, I'm not very good at it, but I would sit for any questions you or the committee may have for me.
You were pretty brief. Questions from Mr. Moline? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other testimony in the room? All right, I don't know if anything's changed online, but I have 4 participants signed up. You have Michael Ferris in the room? Okay. Welcome, Mr. Ferris.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. I hope I can be heard.
We can hear you, we can see you.
Okay, I'm going to change the light for so that that little bar is not there. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you so much. I will try to be as brief as possible. Brief background, I am a constitutional lawyer. I've argued constitutional cases for most of the nearly 48 years I've been a lawyer. I've argued 2 in the Supreme Court. I've represented members of the Washington State Legislature in a constitutional challenge to the effort to extend the time for ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment back in the late 70s and early 80s. I'm one of the few lawyers in the country that's actually litigated in an Article 5 case. I want to go to the last week of the Constitutional Convention very briefly to set some background. George Mason stood up on the floor of the Constitutional Convention and said, and I'm paraphrasing obviously, someday the federal government's going to abuse its authority. And when that happens, the method of proposing amendments where they can only come from Congress will never give us an amendment that will reduce federal power, because it's against nature for somebody to vote to reduce their own power. We've got to give the states the power to reduce the power of the federal government. And that change to the process, which is the current form of Article 5, was agreed to without debate. They saw the good sense of giving the states the ability to limit the power of the federal government. And so, as you heard, 19 states have adopted this exactly, and under the belief that the federal government is in fact abusing its authority, and the twin belief that legislatures have the moral responsibility to exercise the authority that's given to them by the Constitution of the United States to stop this kind of an abuse of power. So if you believe that the federal government spends dangerous amounts of money and the escalating national debt is a threat to our future, you should support this resolution. If you believe the federal agencies shouldn't be able to make law without going through Congress, you should support this resolution. I would just note that we have 5 times as many federal administrative laws as we do laws passed by Congress. If you believe that we shouldn't be subjected to international law by the signature of the president only, and we should send all treaties to the Senate for ratification, where currently only 2 out of every 100 treaties is sent to the Senate for ratification. Those are the kinds of things that you can fix with this amendment, with this process rather. Now, the only questions that usually arise in a conservative state like Wyoming revolve around the claim the process will run away. And I want to deal with the first and most common argument in that regard that was brought up by the last speaker, and that is the myth that the 1787 Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia was a runaway. I've written what I consider to be, and many consider to be, the definitive article that's published in the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy that gives you the complete answer to this myth. The states called the convention. The directions to the delegates was to render the federal constitution adequate for the exigency of the union. The argument that they were only supposed to amend the Articles of Confederation is a myth. And it came from a resolution passed by the Articles of Confederation Congress that simply gave their opinion as to what should be done at the convention. If you read the Articles of Confederation, there was no power in Congress to call such a convention. They didn't purport to call it, and nobody thought that they were. When the delegates looked at their authority, they looked at the resolutions coming from the states. I sent you all by email a few documents, including a 2-page summation of that Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy article. But if you want the whole article, if you just Google my last name, Farris, which Farris, and then the words defying conventional wisdom, you can read the entire Harvard article online for free. There's no paywall. It's readily available to anyone. And I would just simply say, I think it's important for all of us to defend the integrity of the Constitution of the United States. Because if you say it was a runaway, what you're saying was illegally adopted. I just think that we should avoid ever saying the Constitution of the United States was illegally adopted. It denigrates our faith in the Constitution, and it's just historically not true. Secondly, I want to answer an argument that is commonly raised in many circles, especially conservative circles, that the convention could run away and would end up violating our rights. And I will use a common example in that we could lose our Second Amendment by this process. So I'm going to take that on head on. Now, there's a lot of reasons that wouldn't happen. It's not germane under the rules. It's not germane under the call. You can't change the rules in the middle of the stream. The ERA case that I litigated went to the Supreme Court, and it's been litigated in recent years under efforts to try to revive the ERA. The holding of every court has been you can't change the rules in the middle of the stream. So let's just pretend that they still get away with changing the rules in the middle of the stream, despite all that precedent and despite all the impossibility of doing that. And we're down to our last line of defense, and that is ratification. 38 states have to ratify any proposed amendment, no matter how it gets there. And if it's impossible, it's politically impossible to imagine a scenario where 38 states would ratify an amendment that curtails or eradicates Second Amendment rights. The number of states that have constitutional concealed carry provisions are well more than 13. I think it's about double that number. You can list off the states that would defeat such an amendment readily and get to around 30 really, really quickly that would defeat it. And it only takes one chamber in 13. So the political impossibility of that is simply so evident. I won't belabor the point. But I want to compare that to the status quo. Our Second Amendment rights were really only established clearly by the DC versus Heller case about 20 years ago. And that was by a 5-4 vote in the Supreme Court, because the contention was that it's only the militia that have the rights, which is basically the National Guard, and not an individual right. And the pro-Second Amendment forces won that by a 1-vote margin in the Supreme Court. So here's the scenario that could actually lead to the curtailment of our Second Amendment rights. You need an anti-Second Amendment president. You need a political party in control of both houses of Congress that's also anti-Second Amendment. In that scenario, the party in charge repeals the filibuster rule in the Senate, and then they move to expand the number of justices on the Supreme Court to whatever number they need to get a anti-Second Amendment majority in the court. And then they pack the court with enough Second Amendment justices, and one of their state attorney generals brings a gun case to the court, and bingo, our Second Amendment rights are gone. That is incredibly realistic and is foreseeable, I would suggest, in the next 10 years. But the resolution that's in front of you can completely stop this, because the power to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government in this convention would include the ability to take away the power of Congress to set the number of Supreme Court justices. So an amendment that establishes that 9 is the permanent number of the Supreme Court is germane under this resolution in front of you. So the very best defense to stop the court packing, which is the greatest threat to the Second Amendment, is right in front of you. If you want to do something to protect the Second Amendment against the very greatest scenario that we could imagine, which is all too realistic, what you got in front of you would stop the eradication of the Second Amendment better than anything else. I would finally like to close. I've sent you also by email evidence that the John Birch Society, that I know has been active in Wyoming opposing us, that they came before this legislature, that same organization came before this legislature in 1959 and asked this legislature to pass a resolution calling for a convention of the states to pass the Liberty Amendment. I won't go into the details of the Liberty Amendment. I'll just say amendment. I kind of like it. And Wyoming's legislature did call for a convention of states for that purpose. A number of states did at the time. I think it was in the 20s at the time. And now the John Birch Society tells us that doing this, it's too dangerous. Well, it's interesting. The John Birch Society has turned their back not only on the solution the founding fathers gave us, they turned their back on the solution that the founders of their own organization gave you. And I sent articles from the Sheridan Wyoming newspapers in the early 1960s that show you that the John Birch Society was in fact behind the Liberty Amendment, and that I sent you the actual document of the Liberty Amendment itself, and this legislature's resolution calling for a convention of the states for that purpose. So the final point I would make just to answer the question about the existing Wyoming law, I do have the citation for that it tells all the rules for appointing delegates, controlling their actions. It's Wyoming's law, section 9-22-102. Yes.
Actually clocked at 10 minutes now. It's a bit.
Okay, I'm done. I just wanted to give you that citation and I'm done.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Why don't you wrap it up?
Okay, yeah, I just say that the law that gives you the limitations on delegates and how you appoint them is Wyoming statute 9-22-102. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Questions from Mr. Ferris? All right, thank you for joining us, Mr. Ferris.
Thank you.
Who do we have next? Let's let Ms. Baker in.
It looks like I'm being called. Is that correct?
Yes, Ms. Baker, we can hear you, but we can't see you if you want to turn on your camera.
All right. I have this slider thing here. Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Julie Baker. I live outside of Hewlett in Senate District 1, and I'm the state director for Convention of States. In order to respect your time, I know we're getting on a little bit. I'll give the cliff notes of my testimony. I just wanted to, on behalf of the thousands of supporters of Convention of States in Wyoming, respectfully ask you to vote yes on SJ1. Because you normally get supportive emails only from your district, you may not know that there are thousands of supporters in Wyoming, over 13,000. They've demonstrated their support by signing the Convention of States petition. And in fact, Wyoming has the second highest number of petition signers in the country per capita. Each time we speak with someone who's just signed the petition, they're stunned that Wyoming wasn't the first state to pass the Convention of States resolution. It's so obvious to them that we should do this. So let's just put our stake in the ground and join the 19 other states who have passed this application for the framers' most powerful, peaceful, legal, constitutional tool to restore meaningful and enduring limitations on the federal government. Mr. Ferris talked about all the process. If you have any questions for me about grassroots and support in Wyoming, I'm happy to do the best I can to answer them. Thank you very much.
Ms. Baker, I'm just curious if you know, out of those 19 states that have adopted this Convention of the States call application, how many of those were recent, just in the last year or so?
Oh, that's a good question. Not in the last year. I think maybe Nebraska might have been the last, but I don't remember what year that was. It might have been 20. I'm sorry, I don't remember the year. I apologize.
It's not a big deal. I was just curious how long we've been sitting at 19 or in that range.
It's been a couple of years, I think, at least for the 19 range.
Okay,
Close though in many states.
very good. Any questions for Ms. Baker? All right, thank you, Ms. Baker.
Thank you.
Eldon Stahl. Welcome, Mr. Stahl.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Eldon Stahl from Evanston, Wyoming, and I'm opposed to SJ1. And I have a question. What's wrong with the Constitution? Because this resolution deals with changing it. And because proponents don't want to answer that, their lobbyists get, lobbying gets a lot like fishing. Use a hook and cover it with the right bait. But the co-founders of the Convention of States Project have admitted as much. At the 2021 Freedom Fest, Mark Meckler was asked why, if there was no risk to a convention going rogue, why the resolution even has the 3 subjects listed instead of applying for a general or unlimited convention. And he said, quote, "The reason is for narrative. If I were to say, we're just going to have a convention, we have no idea what we're going to talk about at this convention, then frankly, nobody would support it because there'd be so much fear out there that we had to frame it in a way. And if you don't frame a political discussion in the correct way, you lose," end quote. So if they admitted the truth that they have no idea, as he said, what would come out of a convention, nobody would support it, as he admitted. The 3 subjects do not guarantee a limited convention. They are there for controlling or framing how people think about the argument or getting people to accept a story or narrative. Michael Ferris, the other COS co-founder, explained it this way in 2013. Quote, "The greatest thing we can achieve out of a convention is if they mess it up again, we call another convention," end quote. Call another convention? That's the greatest achievement for COS? No specific change, just endless change? Is that what you want? Well, if you take the bait, you get the hook. Why did the founders write Article 5? Well, to provide a process for changing the US Constitution under specific circumstances. Like what? Well, Madison said that it was to supply or correct, in modern English, defects. Washington said if the people feel the distribution of power in the Constitution is wrong, we could change it. Even George Mason, the revered father of the Article 5 Convention, said that the Constitution would be defective and amendments would be necessary. We hear about too much federal spending, debt, power, corruption, and so on. So which parts of the Constitution gave us those problems? Surely the proponents can tell us. Or we could be honest with ourselves and admit that these calamities are from people ignoring, twisting, and trampling the Constitution. Am I wrong? Yet sadly, the solution in this resolution is endlessly changing the Constitution. That's called revolution. So in short, amending the Constitution is emphatically the wrong tool for these problems. But worse yet, the goal of its national promoters, perpetual constitutional change, has been admitted, is being concealed by a carefully crafted narrative. So please oppose SJ1, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Committee, any questions for Mr. Stahl? All right. Mr. Stahl, you might not know this about me, but I'm from Evanston, Wyoming, so go Red
Oh,
Devils.
great.
Yep,
Well, it's a good place to be from.
yep. Happy to see another person from Evanston on the line. Thanks.
You bet.
And then do we have Mr. Hunter?
Yes, you have Mr. Hunter, I think. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We just can't see you if you want to turn on your mic.
Well,
Or you don't, and it's up to you.
I'm not sure you want to see me, but good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am trying to press a little button for my video and it is not complying with me. So what I wanted to say was that if Wyoming wanted to put its money where its mouth was, if you actually look at the Constitution and the Electoral College and things like that, and as well as term limits, one of the best things that we could do is to go back and act like we repealed the 17th Amendment. We could give the governor and the state senate the power to appoint senators. That would make sure that we would have more term limits in the Senate, and also might increase the power. Again, I think the 17th Amendment robbed the state's power. It allowed more outside money to come in and influence who gets elected to the Senate. So I don't approve of going to do this, but if we wanted to set an example for the rest of the states to enhance our republic, we should put in legislation where the governor picks the Senate, each of the 4 years that if they get elected. So that would really, really do a lot for enhancing the republic and the potential for impeachment. I do think all that was robbed when we became a popular election of Senate, and it kind of wrecked the Electoral College. So that's my testimony on it, and good luck with your deliberations. I'll stand for questions.
Any questions for Mr. Hunter? All right, thank you, Mr. Hunter. Anyone else online? Anyone else in the room? All right, we're closing public comment.
Move the resolution.
It's been moved by Senator Hicks. Is there any discussion on this resolution? Any
Mr.
amendments?
Chairman?
Yes.
Well, I still have some reservations about this. I'm going to be for be an aye when we vote, because I do believe something this large should be debated on the floor of the Senate and not just by 5 people.
Any other discussion? Senator Barlow, did you have anything else? You're just ready. Okay. All right. Will you please do a roll call vote on Senate Joint Resolution 1?
Senator Crago,
Aye.
Senator Crum,
Aye.
Senator Hicks,
Aye.
Senator Cole,
Aye.
Chairman Olson,
Aye.
5 ayes.
Well, there you have it, Chairman Barlow. Yep, thank you. With that, folks, we made it through all 4 bills. I guess I could have had a 5th one.
No.
Oh, okay. All right, we are adjourned.
Wow.
Well, there you have it, Rita. That was unanimous, wasn't that? 5 votes?
5-0. Yeah. Another resounding victory.
So for our viewers who maybe were just tuning in, this has been a Wyoming Senate Judiciary Committee, and there was public testimony on our resolution SJ1, and the final vote was 5-0. So Rita, what's the next steps now that it's gone through the Senate Judiciary Committee?
Well, now we wait to see when it will appear on the calendar for a vote by the full Wyoming Senate. And stay tuned, because we will definitely bring you coverage of that Senate floor debate and vote once it happens. I'm sure we're going to, be counting heads, making sure we've got our votes there. But how exciting is that to get another committee victory this week? This is a banner week for Convention of States. And, I want to say, Andrew, what an amazing job our sponsor did. Senator Barlow there in Wyoming, who is our primary Senate sponsor. We do have a ton of co-sponsors out there as well, but Senator Barlow just did such an incredible job introducing and explaining our application, what it does, what it doesn't do, how the process works. He was just so calm, so clear, so confident. It was great. I was really proud of him. And Andrew, I think we have Regional Director Deanna Beckett standing by to give her reaction. There she is. Deanna, you are a busy lady this week, right?
We are just hopping here in the Wild West, and it's exciting to see that victory. Unanimous vote in Wyoming, so that's exciting.
Yeah. So what's your take on what just happened? How did you feel? I know you were streaming, watching that committee hearing. How did you feel about what happened?
Oh, it's not surprising, but it's also amazing that we had zero. I mean, they want to hear it on the floor, and this is all a test, or not a test, just a tribute to the work of our grassroots. Again, we mentioned that before. I heard you both of you talking about that. Our grassroots. Julie Baker, our state director, our volunteer state director, has been building these relationships for years. And I remember, and I do have to give a kind of a side note, a shout out to spouses, all of our supporting spouses that allow us to work these weird hours and just get sidetracked with everything that COS does. But Julie's husband is her roadie. And he shared with me that he drives for her all the time. He shared with me that she spends probably 10 to 12 hours a week on the phone, sometimes with grassroots, but a lot of times with legislators. So these representatives and senators know her when she walks in the room, and she recognizes them. Of course, we always have to get familiar with the new freshmen. But this is all just amazing. And it was great to be on the ground with Rick Santorum last week and watch Julie work her magic. It was just amazing.
Yeah, that's a really great moment, was watching Julie come on and do virtual testimony. And it's unfortunate that we didn't have more grassroots on the ground to offer testimony. I believe I heard there's some bad weather in Wyoming. And also we just found out about this. So it's hard to get people to the Capitol, especially when there's bad weather. But you said something that I think was really impactful. Julie is a volunteer with us, and she's poured her heart into this. And we've interviewed her on COS Live several times, and we've been with her through the victories and the defeats and all of the trials and struggles. And she just keeps coming back. And this is our grassroots across the nation. And what I noticed in that hearing is that there were some volunteers on the other side for the opposition. Those were all, lobbyists or people who are paid by an organization to come and testify in opposition to this. But Julie she's given her time, her talent, her treasure to this. And she's been doing it for so many years. And I think that just speaks to who's behind our organization. It's the people. It's the people of Wyoming. It's the people across the nation that are showing up for this. So that was a moment that really stood out for me. But I'd like to ask you, Deanna, what are some moments that stood out for you during this committee hearing?
Well, Rita mentioned it, that our sponsor, Senator Barlow, was just calm, cool, collected, confident. Obviously, he knows his material. Some of that comes from, our preparation with him, Julie's preparation with him. That was the big thing that came out. And yes, there is, snow blowing and winds going through Wyoming, so that's kept a lot of people at home. But even just having the few that were there, this is probably year 9 or 10 for Wyoming as well. I'd have to go back and count the years, but Rita, you probably know that data better than I do. And these legislators know this material in and out, and they're ready to make a change. I think, everything shifted on November 5th, and this is part of that. And we want positive change across the nation.
Yeah, and I just want to add, Andrew, to your comment about there not being a ton of our grassroots supporters on the ground there. There is a strategy component to that too. We were confident that we had the votes to get through this committee. And when you have the votes, you don't wear people out with a ton of testimony and a ton of people to get through, because these guys know how they're going to vote and they're wanting to get to the next thing they have to do. So it was a wise strategy decision not to have a ton of testimony there. I want to say too, I love what Julie Baker did in her testimony. It was so smart for her to point out that while these committee members might get a ton of emails from naysayers and fearmongers asking them to oppose, those mostly come from out of state. What we do at Convention of States is we have their constituents send them emails asking them to support. But Julie then explained about how many thousands of COS supporters are in the state of Wyoming wanting them to pass this resolution. I just thought that was brilliant. And I want to say that Senator Rick Santorum personally told me how impressed he was with Julie Baker, again, a full-time volunteer out there doing this work for Convention of States, because she's a real patriot who wants to save the country. And I think producer G has Mark Meckler standing by to give reaction. Mark, you were watching as well. What was your takeaway from this hearing?
Yeah, I think Deanna said it well. There's a lot of momentum, and I want for anybody that's new to understand it, and Deanna said this also, 10 years worth of work go into creating that kind of momentum. A lot of times we see people have success in the media and music or whatever, and we say, oh, wow, they're an overnight success. You don't realize that they've been hammering away in obscure nightclubs and college campuses for 10 years to get to overnight success. And that's what I feel like when I see something like this. You mentioned that these legislators, they've been hearing about this for a long time. They know the material over and over. 10 years of work. Everybody who's on here been around pretty close to that long. All the grassroots, Julie, as always, doing an extraordinary job leading that team. And the 10 years lead to things like what you said, Rita, also, which is the strategy, right? So in the past, maybe we would have always loaded up the committee and years ago and always had as much testimony as we possibly could. When you have a pretty good idea that you've got the votes, you show respect to the committee by not having a whole bunch of people testify. Their time is short. They've got a lot of stuff they've got to do. We respect the committee. That's another reason that we don't have people from out of state contacting them. We respect them. We understand their job is to represent their constituents. So we make sure that it's only people from their districts, generally speaking, that contact them. All of these things are wisdom that's been garnered over 11 years plus of doing this. That's what leads to something that looks like on camera a pretty easy victory.
That's right. Well, Deanna, what's coming up next? And do you have a call to action for any of our viewers who are from the state of Wyoming?
Absolutely. What's coming up, of course, you've already covered. We'll be waiting for the motion to get onto the floor, not the motion, but the movement to get the date and the time and when that's scheduled. But a call to action is get a hold of your legislators. You will be, if you're part of our email getting that information by email or text, you should be getting that information, but contact your legislator, your senator at this point, for your senator is priority, and let them know that you want them to support SJ1. They worked hard Senator Barlow worked hard and early. I think it was just after the election and or just into December when he submitted that, because he wanted number one on our resolution in Wyoming. So get a hold of your senator. Thank them if they've supported in the past and ask them to support it on the floor.
Absolutely. And I understand that Senate floor vote could come as early as tomorrow, possibly next Monday or Tuesday, but it will be pretty soon. So stay tuned. Andrew, we're going to be busy on this program for the next several days.
Rita, you said at the beginning it's been a banner week, but I got to tell you, the week's not over yet. We still got tomorrow, and then you know what? It's probably going to be a banner month with everything that's lined up. And Mark, I'd love to ask you. I know you're a busy guy. You got you're a grandfather now. And you got a new pup, and you're on the road all the time. When are we going to see you out in one of the capitals, one of the state capitals, testifying, just like Mike Ferris and Senator Santorum?
What's next, Rita? Do you know?
Yeah.
I see you on the schedule to be at a lot of surge events coming up, Mark, because don't forget, folks, our teams in states that have already passed our Convention of States application, those teams are still just as busy as ever, and we're still sending Mark, Mike, and Rick out to be involved with those teams and helping at their state capitals too.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I get to do that is different than years past is because we have Mike Ferris and Rick Santorum, and they have that nationally known political gravitas. They go into those legislatures and work those pending legislatures. I don't need to be there, and that's freed me up to do something that I have a passion for, which is spending time in with the grassroots in the states that have already passed, making sure they understand we haven't forgotten about them, supporting the work that they're doing. And going to states that maybe are less likely to pass, maybe states on the eastern seaboard and things like that, where they don't get as much attention because maybe they don't look likely to get a floor vote. They're not going to get a Rick Santorum or a Mike Ferris. So, you know, they got to take the booby prize and get me to come out. But I love doing it because I value the grassroots in every state equally. It doesn't matter whether it's a state that's about to pass or a state that is struggling to even file. Our grassroots have equal value to me in every state. So this has allowed me to travel places I wouldn't normally travel. You know, for example, I was in Nebraska not too long ago. That's a state that's working to remove a sunset clause, but they already passed. I can do that because Mike Ferris and Rick Santorum are on the road in the states where the legislation is active.
Well, Mark, we hope to see you out there at Surges. You're welcome to come over to the West Coast, to come over to Nevada, New Mexico, and California, of course. We'd love to see you. Rita, it's been an exciting week so far. More to come. Any final thoughts before we close out?
No, I just hope everyone tunes back in tomorrow. Let's see what happens with this Montana House Committee hearing tomorrow morning.
All right. Well, thank you all for tuning in. Deanna, thank you for being here. Mark, thank you for being here. Deanna, congratulations on this victory, and congratulations to the Wyoming team. Y'all are just so amazing, and our thoughts and prayers are with you as we go to a full Senate vote. So looking forward to that. Make sure to subscribe to this and catch all the action. You can go to conventionofstates.com/COS Live. That way you can get notified anytime there's a committee hearing or a floor vote or anything like that. We'll see you tomorrow, 10 o'clock Eastern, for the Montana committee hearing. All right, with that, folks, time to get back to work. We have a country.